Hi, you all, and welcome to Here to Talk, which we now have subtitled Your One Stop Shop for Getting Unstuck. And I hope very much my guests in this channel are going to help you do just that. And rather than us preach to you, we are very happy to admit that we've all been stuck at times. And therefore, we do know what it feels like. We move on to change, of course, which is a much harder subject. But luckily, all the guests seem to be around that one. And I'm very, very pleased to welcome Margi Biggs. Now, during the course of our chats with guests, we have touched on two subjects, but we've not examined them. One is psychotherapy, and one is a life coach. And it may be that you watching this wherever you are in the world, you may find some money down the sofa to actually afford to take psychotherapy or indeed go to a life coach. So it's very important, I think, to know what you might get. And Mark, it's lovely to see you. Thank you very much for being there. I was really interested talking about us admitting that we've been stuck. I read a wonderful piece that you'd written about what happened to you. I'm going to let you tell this story, but it's great. In the early 2000s, you had a life that looked really successful. You had the grand house, office full of people, business booming, all very impressive, but you weren't feeling great inside at all, were you?
No, absolutely. I mean, as you say, if one were to have looked at my life, you would have thought, gosh, isn't she lucky? She's got this amazing life. She's flitting around the world to see her clients. She's living in this amazing home, driving this fantastic car. She has parties all the time. She has a huge office full of people, lots of clients. And it was an amazing life. However, I was just exhausted, emotionally exhausted, physically exhausted, and I was just on the brink of burnout, quite frankly. I wasn't living my authentic life at all. I'm a farm girl actually from the Karoo, so I was living a life that I thought I wanted, but once I was there, it felt very false to be living that life, and I needed to do something because I was running on empty.
Right. So, as you put it, you decided to step off the treadmill. What did you
Well,
do?
talk about stepping. Well, I decided to step up and I took a long walk in France and Spain. And I walked the Camino, France's 800 kilometers on my own with a backpack. And it was really a walking meditation. And it was without doubt the best thing I could have done for myself. It gave me the opportunity to step back and look at my life, to realize that I wasn't living an authentic life and that I needed to do something about it. And of course, I loved the walk and I loved everything about it. I came home and I was so calm and so connected to the universe in a sense. But what happened was I slipped straight back into my old ways. I mean, one would think that I would immediately make huge changes. But in fact, I didn't. I slipped right back into my old ways, and it wasn't long before I was back on the treadmill. And then,
Just tell me, I may ask about the old ways. So you were back in business, working extremely hard, working all hours, and you somehow had persuaded yourself that that would be all right despite the walk. Did you?
well, I didn't do any persuading at all. I just did it. I didn't even think about it. I just did it. But I woke up one morning and I realized that actually things needed to change. And so the universe conspired for me to make that change. And I moved to Sea Point into a one-bedroom flat. And it's quite interesting that where I lived made such a big difference to who I am. I closed my big office. I downscaled my business. I kept 20% of my clients, 80% of them I handed over to a competitor, and most of my staff went with that business to the competitor. And I just suddenly found myself so relaxed and connected to who I am.
Okay. Can we just track back a second? What was it? What was it? Can you actually tell us what it was that made you decide that things had to change? You tried before, but what was the really big thing now, this time?
Just could not live where I was living. It was not where I could live. It was everything that I wasn't. And I just couldn't be there any longer.
Did you have to
So it was
talk to someone
about
about
moving.
this? Okay, so you had to change. Did you have to talk to someone, or was this a purely personal decision?
It was a decision that I made. It's, you know, how you just wake up and know.
Yes, the trouble is, of course, we do all, well, a lot of us watching this, wake up and know, but then we go on doing what we did. And you've already explained how that actually happened for you, even though you'd been walking through France and Spain in a very spiritual way. So you moved, and did you at that point, you were still in this business, which was, it's a travel business, isn't it?
Mhm.
Travel? Yeah. You thought to yourself, okay, if I'd had a coach, would I have done all this earlier?
Well, absolutely. You know, it's been on my mind. I mean, I only started coaching, as you know, 2 years ago. And since I've been since I've been coaching, and of course I had to study for 14 months before I could start coaching. And it kept going through my mind, if only I'd had a coach, 20 years earlier, I
Yes.
probably would have made very different decisions. But it wasn't that way. And so that's why I'm so, keen for people to find a way to get to coaching if they need it in order for the rest of their lives to be more functional. Well, that's really what I needed. I needed my life to be more functional.
So, in other words, well, okay, we'll be putting the name of your business up on the screen so people can make contact with you. That's why I'm not going down the money route, except to say that money will have to be paid whether you're with you or a psychotherapist. And I think that's fair enough. It's a profession, it's a job. But for people who are really worrying about money, I think we better look at what they could hope for. So they come and see you and they say, we feel very stuck in whatever way. What are the most common ways people get stuck?
Well, it's as wide as human personality, if you think about it, or human interaction with life. I mean, it's that wide. I mean, to give you a very practical example, I have a client who was a small businessman, and his business was leaking profit, and he didn't know why. And he came to see me, and we unpacked his business essentially, and the way he operated in his business. And over a period of 8 sessions, we were able to, and he gave me these stats afterwards, that he was able to increase his input into his business by 5%, but the profits went up 15%. So, I mean, that's a very practical business example. But on the other hand, I've had clients who have just found themselves in a place where they want to do things, but they can't. I mean, I have a client who, she's a mom, and she has two children who are school going age, and she's at home, and she keeps an immaculate home. That for her is really important. And her husband is running he has quite a high powered job. So he's in and out of the home, as it were. So she a lot of time on her own. So she wanted to start something, but she finds herself incapable of completing anything. And so we looked at, well, what do you want to complete? And she said, well, I'm very good at designing things, but I'm also good at running. And if only I could finish a marathon, or I could finish designing this set of greeting cards. But I start and I don't finish.
Does she know
So I worked with her. Say again?
why can't she finish? Can you just tell us why she gets stuck at that point?
Well, it seems to her, and it seemed to me, because that's what she said, she's frightened of being successful. Because if she's successful, then there will be expectations placed on her. And and that was very interesting. So I said, well, what are those expectations that you're worried about? And she started to tell me that if she was successful, then she may have to leave the home and go and work, or go and run professionally, or go out of the home. And she didn't want to do that. She wanted to be at home with her children. And
But
so she had this,
yeah, go on.
so her fear was, if she was successful, she would have to change the way she was living. And so she didn't want to be successful. So it was really interesting to work with her, for her to discover that for herself.
Yes, it's interesting, Margie, though, that who did she think was going to make her change the way she did things, that she'd have to go out to work and all this stuff? Who was promoting the fear in her? Was it coming from her or somebody else?
Well, she seemed to think that it would come from her peer group, the people around her, and also her in-laws, and to an extent her husband.
This must be quite a common one, actually, because one always likes to think in this nice way that our families are going to be great for us and encourage us along the way. But this is just not the case. Lots of people, it's this business of people are scared to leave the tribe because the tribe might not like what they're doing. It's very interesting you say that.
Yeah, so I mean, it was interesting working with her because it took us some time to unpack that. So we first worked at her business idea, and then we worked on her running. Now, what was interesting is that she had found herself at time, well, she had told me about one time where she had trained sufficiently that she could arrive to start a marathon. So she had done all the training and she knew she could complete this marathon, but she got to the parking lot and she said, I couldn't find a parking. So she found an excuse for herself not to start the marathon by saying, I couldn't
Yes.
find a parking. Now, you know, marathons, I know you will always find a parking. And, because you're a runner, doesn't matter how far it is, you'll run to the start. So it was interesting that eventually so I did 8 sessions with her and we first worked on her business idea and we actually got nowhere with that. I mean, she showed me the design. She sent me the designs. We talked through business plans. We went through all of it and she just could not get going. And then we started working on the running. And must have been about 4 months after I stopped working with her, she sent me a message saying, I've just completed my first marathon.
Isn't that great?
Yeah. So, it's a process. One doesn't go to coaching and solve one's problems. One finds a way to start to work on whatever one needs to work on. Because
But I think,
there are no quick fixes. Life is not
no.
like that. We have to slowly work at whatever challenges we have.
And if you can identify the fear inside you, that must be really important, possibly where it's coming from. Do you do that as well?
Well, it's up to the individual. I mean, the way I work is we first try to discover where someone wants to be. So, what is it that you want for your life? And then we try and find it for the individual to decide, is that really what I want for my life? And we look at other alternatives before, we just go backwards and forwards with all kinds of discussion on. I'm listening very carefully to the client to see, is that
Sure.
really what they want? And asking them pertinent questions to check them on what they're saying. Very often we say, I want to whatever, whatever, I want to do something. And actually, it's not what we want. It's what we think we want. So we need to really find it out. What is it that I really want for my life? And when we know
Well,
that, then we need to find out, who am I? Because most of us don't really know ourselves that well. So we
well,
need
it's
to
what
then
you were
unpack.
saying earlier about you weren't your authentic self. You weren't
Mhm.
the real Margie.
Precisely. Yeah. And I
That's
think
what you're
that's
looking for
important.
in other people. So people come to you. I think it's quite important at this stage to differentiate between what you do as a life coach and what psychotherapists do.
Yes. Oh, yes. And I will say this right up front is that if I find that someone comes to me and they need psychotherapy, then I won't take them on as a client. Because, when we start, we have what we call a chemistry session, which is the first session to find out whether they can work with me or can I work with them. And if then I discover that actually what they need is another kind of therapy or a type of therapy, then I let them know that I'm not the right person for them to be working with and that they need to go and see a therapist. And I do
Isn't
have a number of therapists who I'm aware of, and I will refer them and say, it's better for you to go and see this kind of therapist for these reasons. And I also tell them I could be wrong, but this is
well,
what
they
I
must
think.
be some of them might be actually quite devastated by the idea they're being told that they're batty, bonkers, off the wall,
No, no,
mentally ill.
no, no, no. I certainly wouldn't put it that way, you know. I'd simply tell them that I'm not qualified to help them with what they're telling me. But what I do think is that there are people who can help them with what they're telling me. And the people who I think can help them are, and I'll give them alternatives.
It's a very fine line, isn't it? It's a very fine line between, okay, being, in quotes, normal, but having fears and trepidation and generally not being able to move forward, to actually having some form of mental illness or having depression or anxiety. Quite a difficult line for you to determine, because someone with fear, that's in quotes normal. We all have fears, but that person who has depression or has some form of psychological illness, you're saying can't do that one.
Yes, and it is challenging. However, essentially, for me, the work I can do is help the individual move from where they are to a future place. I can't help them with the past. So essentially, if their challenges are based on something that has happened before in their lives, I'm not the person for them to be talking.
I think that is so hugely important. We all dwell far too much on the past. What we did do, what we didn't do, why we think it went wrong. It takes up massive amounts of time in our lives. And a lot of us are quite obsessive about it. So quite how you get them to stop is pretty miraculous, really. Presumably you say to them, let's put a halt on the past and let's look at now and the future.
Well, the way I work is I say, what do you want to achieve for your life? That's the beginning. So we're looking forward. And we make a note of that's what we want to achieve. We want to find a way to get to that place. Then we check whether that place, excuse me. So we first find out where does the individual want to get to? And once we know that, we check whether that is essentially where that person does want to get to. And then we say, okay, if that is the case, then how do we get there? And then every session, we start the session with, what do you want to achieve today? In other words, what are we going to work on today? Reminding them that the end goal is to get to where they want to go to, so that they work on today, the end goal, but maybe they're working on it in a small way. So a smaller portion of getting to the end goal. So they're
Yes,
always working towards the end goal. So we're
it
not
must be
looking back.
difficult.
Mhm.
Because you're dealing with people who will be listening to their family, their children, their parent, whatever, and they may be giving you the views of them, not the actual views of themselves.
Well, I think that when we're in our discussions, we'll always check in on, it's not so much why do you think that? It's more a case of, if you think that, what are the repercussions of you thinking that? So it's more a check on self. It's always a check on, why am I, or what am I doing for myself, as opposed to, but I am doing it within the community. I'm part of a community. I'm part of a small group of people, which is family. I'm part of the wider community. I'm part of the universe. And each thing that I'm doing or thinking is impacting on those different groupings that I am part of. So I have
Can you
responsibility in all those areas.
Yeah. So how long does it take you to spot what your word was, authentic self? Because we do all put on a face for whatever we're doing with whom we are with. So how long does it take you to suss somebody and say, I'm dealing with this real person?
It varies. It depends on the individual. You know, some of us are more open than others. Some of us are very closed to ourselves, and it takes a bit of time for us to recognize that we're closed to ourselves. And when we do, we then find that we have a challenge in actually recognizing it for ourselves. And then to open up to others is also a challenge. So it's a
Yeah.
process. The biggest thing about coaching is that it needs to be a huge amount of trust between the client and the coach. if that trust doesn't exist, there can be no coaching. And it has to go two ways. So I have to trust that my client will do what they say they'll do, that they're coming to coaching with an honesty, and vice versa.
It's very important. I'm surprised sometimes it can only take 8 sessions. It takes a very long time to trust somebody and spill the beans, tell them about yourself and what you want. Takes quite a long time. I'm harking back to psychotherapy where people stay for years and years and years, but you're saying it can be done sometimes quicker.
What I'm saying is that when one in the initial discussion says, what do you want to achieve? And you set a goal, there have been times where I've said, what you want to achieve can't be done in one contract. But we can say, what you want to achieve, we can start to work towards that. And at the end of the first contract, which is 8 sessions, we can look at it and say, what have we achieved towards this goal? And do you want to continue to work on the rest of this goal? And then the client decides if they want to continue or they don't. I have one client who, she has been working with me for a very long time. And I'm astounded, and I'm so happy for her, because when she came to me, she had huge psychological challenges, and she was working with a therapist at the time. And she came to me and I said, well, I don't understand why you want to work with me, because you're already working with a therapist. And she said, I want to work with you because I want you to walk alongside me in the process.
That's
And
nice.
I think essentially what she was saying was she needed a friend. Now, I'm not her friend, and I
No.
was very clear that I'm not her friend. I hold her to account. And if she says, I want to achieve something, I will hold her to account that that's what she wants. So I'm not her friend. So she was in a situation where she was at home and she was so in such a difficult situation that she had lived with her mother her entire life. She was in her 30s. She is in her 30s. And she lives in a small town, or she lived in a small town. And her mother was very ill, and she'd been her mother's primary caretaker. And she had all kinds of challenges with this. So she had all kinds of challenges with this. And then she found herself incapable of even walking to the front gate of their home. She was able to operate, but only if she was in her home. Now, clearly, those are psychological issues she's dealing with, which I can't help her with. But we could talk about how she could envisage herself doing something. And we started to work with all the areas of her life. So we started to work with not just that problem, but all the areas of her life. And so while she was in grief counseling, because her mother then died, she was in grief counseling. And so we started to work with all the process, with all the things that were going on in her life. But the end goal was she wants to be a mother. She wants to find out where her forever home is. She doesn't believe it is where it is at the moment. She wants to be healthy, which she's not at all. She's not healthy at all. She's hugely overweight. She's a vegetarian who doesn't take care of her diet properly. So she has all kinds of health issues and various other things that she wanted to achieve. So we started to work on her as a holistic human being who is in a community. She has friends. And so as we worked over time, now it's been 18 months. Not only does she drive her car with no one next to her, which is eventually how she started. She could only drive somewhere if there was someone next to her. When she could drive, she can not only walk to the bottom of the road, but she has gotten an aeroplane for the first time on her own and flown to
Wow.
Greece to visit with some
Wow, that's
friends.
great.
I mean, remarkable if you think in 18 months that this woman has moved from being incapable of leaving her home to getting on an aeroplane and flying to Greece. But to
But
get
it's
her onto that
amazing.
aeroplane was a huge process of working through
Y
what is it going to be? How is she going to navigate that?
So it is possible, as you've just said, for there to be the psychological process going on alongside you. as long as they're not bringing the deep psychological problems to you. Yeah?
Yes, you see, so essentially, I'm working with the practicalities in this case, the practicalities of life. You know, it's yes, you are overweight. Yes, you are going to get onto the plane. Yes, the person next to you might not like the fact that you are huge. How do you deal with that? Yes, you're going to stop in Doha. When you get to Doha, how are you going to navigate the fact that you've got 4 hours layover? How are you going to move from one terminal to the next? How are you going to do this? Talk her through, let her live it ahead of time so that when it happens for her, she's comfortable in herself and she doesn't get into a panic so that she can live a normal life.
She hasn't done it yet, or she
She's
has?
done that. She's also moved. She now lives in a different town.
That's great. Well, that's a
So
very
she's
good
moving.
example.
Yeah, so she's moving towards what her goals were.
Yes.
She's not a mother. Her health is improving. She's seeing somebody that will work with her diet. She has been now for about 6 or 7 months by now. So she's slowly moving in the right direction in all
Yes.
areas of her life.
The key is she wants to change. She wants to change things. And that's what this whole thing is about. All the people we're talking to, how do they get to the start line? Do they want to change? Why are they stuck? Because if you can get unstuck, you probably might want to change in some direction and you may need guidance or not.
Mhm.
Tell me before we have to finish, it's very important to ask you about business because life coaching can make a lot of difference to businesses where they're stuck.
Yes. Now, I gave you one example of a client who he was stuck because he wasn't making any money, basically. And so he had to work with that. Sometimes it's it's challenges that a business might have when it comes to, let's say, it comes to somebody not performing in their business, particularly small business, which is what I know best. Somebody's not performing in their business. So they need to look at what are the reasons that this person is not performing? Did they employ the wrong person? In other words, it's not the person's fault that they are not performing. If that is the case, they're not performing because they're not the right person. In other words, it's not their fault were um, that they were employed, and now they're not performing because they don't know how to do what. Do they need training? So the business person who comes to me, we look at what's going on in your business and what needs to change. What do you need to change? Not what's wrong with the people in your business, but what do you need to do in order to change what is there in order for the business to thrive? So
Yeah,
it's
and
always comes back to the individual.
they maybe have to face some unfortunate practicalities and facts, like they're spending too long on the golf course or whatever. So, I mean, that's quite tricky for you.
Yeah. 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 Well, it was interesting. One client, we looked at why was he, we were looking at time, why did he not have enough time? And you can do on the app, on the social media app, you can see how long you spend on social media. And he was spending more than 2 hours a day on social media. He didn't realize that. And it wasn't social media that was useful to his business necessarily. He's a fascinating man. He's a doctor of economics, but his business has got nothing to do with that. But he has these wonderful debates with people all over the world about, global issues, which he's enjoying enormously. And they're fascinating, but it's not feeding his business.
No.
So he's spending all this time on actually just entertaining himself on social media and his social media friends or academics around the world. But his business in the meantime is suffering. So he worked out how much time he was spending, and it was a huge surprise to him. And having seen that, he could then say, okay, well, I need to actually limit the amount of time I'm doing this.
Yeah, it's quite a tough one to face, but there must be many, many people who think, okay, well, it'll just run itself. It's doing okay, and particularly if it's not in any great financial trouble. And it's quite a tough one for a life coach to point out these things, saying to the guy, you've got to do some changing here. Come off that social media.
No, no, no. That's not what I do. What I do is I don't point out anything. I ask questions which allow them to discover for themselves these facts. So I didn't say
Right.
to him, let's look at social media and see how long you're spending. I said to him, let's look at the areas in your day. Let's look at what you're doing. And so let's start with when you wake up in the morning and let's allocate the time. And we found there was a big lot of time that wasn't allocated. So let's go back and say, when you've left the house to go to work, what happens? How long does it take? And then what's happening there when you were over breakfast? How long are you having breakfast? Oh, you're spending an hour and a quarter having breakfast. What else are you doing over breakfast? So I'm asking questions and they are discovering for themselves. I didn't know there was this app that you can check how much time you spend on social media. He told me about it because I was asking him questions about that. And I said, but then if that's the case, how much time are you spending on social media? He says, I don't know, but let's look. And he tapped on his phone and he said, and then he looked at me and he said, I don't believe it.
So the penny dropped at that point. He got it. He got it.
The aha experience, which is what
Mm.
every coach is looking for, is for the client to discover something which says to them, aha, now I understand. But the,
Yeah.
the discovery, the client must have the discovery, and my job is to lead them to have the discovery by asking the right questions.
So finally, let me ask you, in this, I think you've been at it 18 months, 2 years now. What have you learnt from being a life coach?
To listen and to listen and to listen again. Just to listen to what my clients say and to listen to what they don't say and to listen into the gaps because, it's and then to ask the question in the gaps, the things they don't say, to ask them about what they're not saying. So I've learned to listen. I think I'm a much better listener than I ever was before. And I think I'm getting better all the time. Um, yeah,
So
I think
it's
that's
something you've now realized after all that time when you weren't sure about what you should be doing, big business, walk the Camino, all that stuff. This is the moment now when you feel this is your aha moment that you're doing the right thing.
I do. There's nothing more satisfying to me than when I see the client have the aha experience or when they move closer to what their goal is. Or when they say to me, I've run that marathon 3 months after the event. For me, that is just so satisfying and I'm just loving it.
Margie, it's been a really interesting conversation now. We know a lot more about life coaches and a lot more about you. And thank you so much for being with me.
Been good talking to you. Take care.